We've had a number of folks telling us about the operation of platforms, about in new settings in medicine, in industrial products, and in entertainment. But I'd like to bring you someone who creates platforms from the get-go and chooses the winners and losers and the successes. I'd like to introduce Connie Chan, who's joining us from Andreessen Horowitz. Many of you may know Andreessen Horowitz is one of the most successful venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. Now, Connie has been a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz for a little while. She joined in 2011. I believe you have a focus on social media, on mobility, entertainment, learning. One really interesting example is actually at the far end of the spectrum, mining with the firm Cobalt. We might actually ask about that for a little bit. I wouldn't have expected that as a platform play, and there's some really interesting questions there. Also, there's an interesting firm, Run the World, on how to run a better conference. So you can tell us tips on what we're doing wrong here and how that actually goes. Connie's been deeply interested and integrated in Chinese technology consumer landscape for a while. Matter of fact, she won the Sydney Award for Best Writing on WeChat. She's a LinkedIn top professional for those 35 and under, and a Wired technology visionary. Before that, she was at Hewlett-Packard, working on web operating systems in China and private equity investing at Elevation Partners. Connie has a BA in economics, yay, or I studied some of those things too, and then engineering and management science at Stanford. One thing you may not know is that Connie is also good at a cappella singing. So I think she can probably run harmony with Dr. Bush, who was offering to sing for us this morning. So quite an accomplished musical group at the Platform Summit this year. And also, Connie helped Chance the Rapper enter and break into the Chinese market. So there have been some interesting nuances and developments there. So with that, let me introduce Connie. If you have any opening remarks, and then I have a bunch of questions for you, and we'll take those questions from the audience as well. So Connie, please introduce and say hi.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. As just mentioned, I am a big fan of looking at platforms and how consumers are spending their time and how they're spending their money. And also, because I study so much and I had worked in China previously, a lot of my inspiration and learnings come from studying what's happening in developing markets and using that as a lens and additional information to help me predict what's going to happen in the Western markets. And so I've been using that strategy for the last couple of years. And through that, I've developed a lot of my theses around platforms on the mobile front, specifically a concept that I call super apps.
Actually, all right, that is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. What is a super app and what's happening there? What's in the super app space?
So a super app to me is basically an application that gives users access to different kinds of products and services that aren't necessarily the primary reason why a user wants to go download that app. And the best example that I give is WeChat, which is a messaging app. So it started out as just an app that you use to chat with your friends and your family, then evolved to become an application that you use to interact with businesses, local coffee shops, street vendors, so forth. And now you can use it to interact with celebrities, bloggers, news companies, and so forth. And it's basically evolved from an application to an operating system, almost like a browser. You can live your entire day inside of this one application. And so a super app will take something that's high frequency use case or a long-term use case, like messaging. And it will use that to lead gen for something that's lower frequency use case. And from a business model perspective, why it's really exciting is because you can take something that's high frequency use. It might be a free app, most likely it is. And it's an application which might have a product which has low margin and use that to then lead gen for much higher margin, lower frequency products.
So I don't know, for Western audiences who haven't necessarily used WeChat, it is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Really kind of an operating system for society. So you can order pizza, you can make payments, you can pay your utility bills, you can do instant messaging. It is incredible. Matter of fact, Facebook wishes it was WeChat in terms of user engagement. Why do you imagine that we don't have any equivalent super apps in the United States? What has really been the difference? What has allowed super apps in China where they haven't taken off in the US?
I think that's a great question. And I think that the fact that super apps exist and flourish really in China and Asia isn't necessarily a cultural difference. I believe it's a trend that will eventually make its way to the US. There's just a typical time lag, I'd say, of 3 to 5 years. And I do think you already are starting to see Western companies like an Instagram or like a Uber, who are starting to introduce other kinds of features and products that are not core to the main product offering. And why it started taking off first in China, I truly believe the main reason is because China is more of a mobile first society. And it's shifted from a computer very quickly to a mobile first. And now I'd say actually it's more of a mobile only society, to the point where you get startups and new developers that are creating for mobile specifically and might not even have a website. And as much as we think that the Western world is mobile first or mobile only, we're not. A lot of developers are creating PC and mobile equivalents. But it's when you live your entire world on your smartphone, then the super app concept becomes much more obvious.
So some new technologies are enabling more and more of this. And some of the things that you've been investing in include things like these app clips. What is this technology and how is this going to actually expand the platform opportunity? What's happening in this?
Yeah, so app clips is something really exciting that Apple announced very recently. And the most basic understanding of it, I would say, is think of it as these physical bookmarks that can be dropped all over the offline world. And the visual of like something that looks like a QR code, such that you as a user could go to one of these codes, use your phone camera, scan it, and then be taken to an app clip, which is basically a small mini portion of an app-like experience without having to download the app. So imagine you're in a restaurant, and rather than downloading an app to order food or pay, you can just scan the little code on your table and then use that to order food and also pay for your food. And it's basically allowing you to have app-like functionality without going through the friction and the hassle of going to the app store and having to download an application, sign up, and so forth.
So this seems like an ingenious idea so that small firms won't have to develop their own apps. I mean, it clearly makes no sense for an individual restaurant, with a staff of 12 to hire an app developer because no one's going to download their app relative to these other things. So huge economies of scale, but isn't this going to concentrate the power at the center for Apple or others that actually control the apps themselves? Isn't it going to actually give them increased control? So isn't there a danger here?
I mean, I don't think it's any different than the App Store experience today, where the Apple controls the App Store. And I think as long as they create a platform where any developer that follows the developer guidelines is allowed to participate, then that's how you create true platforms, right? Where everyone has to abide by the same rules, but as long as you qualify with those rules, you can participate.
That's great. Jeff is going to say hi for a moment. I'm going to go kill a landscaper who's mowing outside. I'll be back.
Hi, Connie.
Hi.
That's part of this new reality that we're all
Totally
interacting with. Maybe I'll just ask a kind of a big landscape question, which is, as you survey the investment scene and you're sort of sifting through the opportunities, a lot of what we saw happen in the early growth of platforms was around the B2C world and kind of social. And presumably there's still a lot of innovation there, but of course there are giant incumbents. What's your thesis for how you approach finding opportunities and sectors, and what sorts of things are you really going to stay away from, at least until there's some sort of significant change in the landscape of incumbents?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true in the world of social. There are very large incumbents already. However, what I do is I look at areas where the incumbents might not necessarily be extremely strong. So for example, incumbents in social, I don't think are particularly strong in facilitating stranger to stranger relationships. And they're great for capturing that social network, that social graph of your real life friends, of your real life family. In many ways, actually, like iMessage, I think is the biggest social network of them all. However, none of these platforms are particularly strong in helping identify to you who are friends that you would really get along with that you just haven't met. And in the online world, for this kind of stranger to stranger interaction, you're left with things like Twitter, which is oftentimes much more a consumption experience as opposed to a true interaction, or dating apps. And there's nothing wrong with dating apps, but there's folks who just want to look for friends and like-minded individuals who have similar interests. And we instead are going to conferences to meet those people. So I think those are great opportunities for social to really innovate.
So
Go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah, so you mentioned actually, you've invested in these interesting companies which are trying to facilitate exactly those kinds of social interactions. So how are you going to be able to create an online sense of community that's as effective as one offline?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're professors at this end. One of the wonderful things about college is the incredible social interaction that you get with folks.
It's the dorm life, yeah.
Yeah, my own kids, for example, are demurring about going back to college this particular fall because they're worried they're not going to get the social interaction. So how are you going to do that? You're investing in these things. What's the difference? How are you going to make it happen?
I completely agree. So much of the online experience today doesn't fully capture the side conversations, right? Even when you have a conference, it's the hallway conversation. It's the conversation with the person sitting next to you. It's the happy hour after the sessions end that you make the relationships that you go to the conferences for, right? Because unless you're there talking to the speakers backstage with a VIP pass, a lot of reasons why you go to these conferences is because it's a natural filter, a curated set of people that are like-minded that have similar interests. So I completely agree that a lot of the magic of these conferences has been in these offline kind of side conversations. And the company that you're alluding to, Run the World, is trying to tackle just that problem, actually. So the founders came from Facebook, they came from Instagram. And so they have this kind of social DNA already built into their mindset. And their goal is not to create this kind of webinar, 1 to hundreds, 1 to thousands kind of experience, but something that also allows for the side conversations, something that can actually take the online concept and turn that into a strength. So imagine going to a conference and now, rather than just choosing a random person that looks friendly to go up and talk to, instead, you could almost basically see like the LinkedIn profile of everyone there, and then decide who is the right person that you want to engage with. Or better yet, let the conference, smartly using an algorithm, recommend who you should meet up with, and even give you tips on topics and things that you guys share in common, so that the icebreaker is more natural, right? It allows people who are introverts like myself not have to feel as brave when engaging with other people. And imagine where the conference allows you to do this. Imagine doing it through video or audio if you're shy, or even texting, so you can continue those conversations in a really natural way days or weeks after the conference. I think there's actually a lot of digital social interaction that happens on social networks today that we can carry to things like conferences.
So one of the things we've always argued is that platforms are really, the whole point of a platform is to consummate the match. So in some sense, maybe if the conference software or the expert can actually take the friction out of that process and get a better match of the different
right.
Things. It's often been interesting that some of the best interactions have been with the other panelists at some great talks. So it's really already been curated for things that are particularly interesting. Although I must question, I still don't see the sex, drugs, and rock and roll part really being as much of a part. We did try to get the rock and roll part of it. To see if we can get that in. You've been a big proponent of online to offline, again, as these other kinds of platform evolution. How do you see that taking place, and what are you doing to foster that? What's happening?
Yeah, online to offline is really this idea that retail innovation and physical worlds can be infused with technology. And it's a concept that was also very popular across Asia several years ago, where everything from your convenience store to your gym to your grocery store was decked out with technology. Like if you went to an Alibaba grocery store or a Walmart grocery store in China, you would see QR codes on packages or on the price labels, and you would be able to figure out recipe combinations or understand the origins of that fruit. I kid you not, there's also places where there's shopping carts where you literally just put on a wristband and then the shopping cart automatically follows you around. So you don't even have to push and navigate the cart around the aisles. Um,
I want that. It's touch-free for COVID. It's wonderful. Okay.
Right, exactly. So there's already a lot of innovation in the offline world, and so much of it is using things like QR codes, using things like the smartphone, and using platforms that naturally have payments built into them, so that it's all about decreasing the friction for someone to purchase something in the physical world or do something in the physical world. Imagine when you walk into a store, the store already kind of has a sense for who you are. They can make the right product recommendations. They can potentially even change pricing, whatever they want, and kind of give different kinds of promotions and target you as a specific customer. As you mentioned, for platforms, it's all about the match. It's all about personalization, right? And online to offline is the personalization of the physical world, where your online profile and who you are and your shopping history, your whatever kind of history, can now be applicable and seen through folks in the offline world.
Do I want insurance companies conditioning my health on my grocery purchases? The amount of data here is going to be really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, platforms is also about concentrating data, because that's how you can get to the personalization. That's how you can get to the recommendation, right? And I agree, there is a lot of power and a lot of data that can be concentrated as a result. I think it's still unseen if the Western world is going to adopt that kind of behavior. However, I have to say that I've seen convenience win out over privacy when you look at actual consumer behavior in the Western world. Despite what we say we want, our behaviors are often quite different. So I think it's still an unknown question.
Jeff wants to jump in.
I'd love to ask, so first of all, that's clear that people are acting differently than they say. So revealed preference is pretty strong there. I've got a question. When you work with teams, and you see quite a number of them, you see a lot of proposals. I want to talk about the teams though. What are some consistent things that you find really strong, that sort of the culture is doing well, the education system is doing well? And then the flip side is, where do you feel like, as sort of a funding firm and a matchmaker of your own, you end up having to backfill or teach in ways that you're like, I can't believe this is the 8th time I've had to do this. So what are consistent gaps that you find yourself having to step in to fill?
Yeah, so a lot of the founders that we back are first-time founders. And therefore, there's a lot of nuances around the company building aspect, not necessarily the product or the vision, that actually do require a significant amount of handholding, or rather, if you do have that help, it saves you a lot of time and headache. So we have actually built a firm that is concentrated around helping these founders with the company building part of their business. So we have teams that focus on introducing folks to great talent, helping them think through talent incentives. We have folks focused on people practices, on HR, guidelines, compliance, and so forth. We have a very large market development team, which think of it as business development and access to global 1,000 type of large companies to create great partnerships. So we have all of these different teams that basically work with the portfolio companies full-time for free to help them get introduced to new networks. Because imagine, if you are an engineer who just created a great product, you likely don't know that many reporters, and you're going to need help on the marketing front, right? Most likely you've never had to hire a head of sales before. So why not talk to someone who can give you guidance on what to look for? What's the difference between a candidate who's good and great, and how do I interview for that? So we spend a lot of time thinking through what are issues that companies will have, but we take a platform approach too. So we're looking at creating these networks that most likely, largely, almost all of our portfolio companies are going to need, which means we're not going to go in and help with specific product or engineering issues. Instead, we're going to create a platform ourselves. And we're going to say, okay, you're going to need access to this network of reporters. All of our portfolio companies are going to need access to these same reporters. So let's instead take that link and let's nurture those kinds of relationships so that we can help facilitate those kinds of introductions when appropriate.
Well, let me jump in with a thought and a question. So if they're struggling, I hope to share our book, just a plug there, on platform revolution. But you doing something that I would not have expected, and this is something I actually think is quite interesting and very informative for this audience. You're investing in a venture that does mining. You wouldn't necessarily have thought of that kind of a heavy industry.
Mm-hmm.
What are the platform attributes of that business, and what chose you to go into what had been a non-traditional platform business? What do you see as the opportunity there?
Yeah, I mean, non-traditional sectors, I think, are fantastic, quite honestly, because if you take a non-traditional industry and you find a problem that is very software driven, that really has network effects, that truly has a theory of defensibility, you can attract fantastic tech talent to that, where the other incumbents aren't going to have access to those same MIT engineers. And our investment in mining is, again, it's a tech software play. So the company is called Cobalt Metals, and they're not doing the actual mining themselves, but they're creating a Google Maps for the Earth's crust envelope. And they're gathering all kinds of data from all over the world, from government resources or proprietary data sources. And they're using machine learning algorithms to have a much more smarter guess, quite frankly, using physics, chemistry, all kinds of science on what kind of mineral might be below the surface. And the main mineral that they're first looking for is cobalt. And cobalt is a very important element for batteries. And they're in your phone, they're in your laptop, but most importantly, there's a lot of cobalt in your electric vehicle, around $1,500 worth. And so because electric vehicles are now becoming increasingly more in demand, not just here, but globally, you have countries mandating that within 2 decades, actually much shorter, you won't even be able to get a license plate in a lot of cities unless it's an electric vehicle. So with the new demand for electric vehicles and new demand for electric vehicle batteries, there's a shortage of cobalt around the world of all known supplies and all known sources, but yet it's not a rare mineral. But the reason why this is a platform play, again, is you're taking data that's already available and also new data sources, and then you're using technology to have a defensible algorithm and basically a machine prospector is what we call it, to help detect and get smarter every single time you drill on where these minerals might be.
So I love that for a particular different reason. So one is not only a non-traditional industry, it's what you'd think of as a heavy industry. But you've also done something which we've argued for a long time, is you've actually been able to add information, in a sense, value-adding information to a traditional physical process.
Right.
So here, in terms of doing the mapping for the crust, or in terms of doing better engineering to find deposits, you're adding information and becoming more efficient in this, which is a really interesting and innovative proposal. I'm thrilled to say you've sparked wonderful sets of questions. So let me see if I can start to help engage the audience a bit and see what your take on a couple of different things is. So earlier in the day, we had a discussion of Meituan versus Groupon. What do you see as distinguishing factors that have made Meituan such a success in China, despite the fact they started with the same business model? What do you think is the difference?
Yeah. So Meituan is a key example of what a super app can be. And what I say is like Meituan, yes, they have group buying, but they have so much more beyond just group buying, right? As an example, you can book hotel nights through this application, where you're not just using this to order food, but you might be using this to book your business travel. And they added this functionality, a small little icon on the app to book hotels, just a couple of years ago. And they already are booking more hotel nights now than Ctrip, which was the leading incumbent online travel provider. And so if you take something that's high frequency use case like food ordering, you can basically have an entire screen to promote all other kinds of features and services. And yes, ordering food and delivering food can be a low margin business, but booking hotels is a very high margin business. And so a key super app is something that takes that low frequency use case that might be low margin, might even lose money, honestly. And then you use that to lead gen for all of these high margin businesses that are lower frequency. Because rather than go download an application just to go book travel, now I can just do it in the application that I'm opening every day anyways.
Let me jump in. That is incredibly deep and important insight. I want to double down for this audience how important that insight is. What Connie's just said is something that all the firms in this audience need to be aware of. To give you another illustration of that same point, a few years ago, Johnson & Johnson sold its diabetes business. The reason was it was low margin. But guess what? It's extremely high frequency interaction. It's daily, from which you could then bolt on other services that would be high margin. So Connie's insight is incredibly important, and you have to think differently when you're running a platform versus when you're running a product. Connie, I got to thank you for that. That's really
and I think it's especially important on mobile because people are downloading fewer apps now than they were years ago. The bar for what it takes to download an app has grown. And that's why the Apple app clicks makes sense, right? But because that bar is now so high, people don't necessarily want to go download an app to do something that's a very low frequency use case.
So let me jump in with another question. So the audience is definitely interested in your skills as venture capitalist. When you're investing in a venture, what do you emphasize? What are the metrics you follow? Are you following the financials or are you following non-financials? What are you looking at?
It really depends on the stage. So I'll tell you, I have backed companies off of PowerPoint. Nothing has been coded whatsoever. I have no metrics I can use to measure them whatsoever. I have backed companies where I've done that actually multiple times, where there's really no metrics. Sometimes there is metrics that you can look at. And what I'm looking for is sign of long-term use case. So signs of retention. To me, high frequency use case is great because it does indicate super app potential, but long-term frequency is also important. And then the other thing that I look for super app potential is two more things. Another key ingredient to super apps is payments. If you are payment enabled, have a credit card linked, you are now one tap away from any purchase. And that's why even though Uber is a transportation app, as they're increasingly adding all these different services on and makes it so low friction to check out, they actually can become a super app, right? So payments is another big piece. And then the other one is, does this application know something unique about that particular individual? Do they just know that this person is a teenager? Not very helpful. But do they also know that this person might be a student? This person has these particular interests. This person has these particular friends. Having additional data on the user, again, allows you to have that recommendation, that personalized experience.
So that's very helpful. All right, I'm gonna have to go rebalance my portfolio. Thank you. So those are very, very useful tips. I think we have time for one more question, even though there are quite a few remaining. Another participant would like to know, how is it that ByteDance has chosen to offer different versions of the same app in different locations? Wouldn't you expect the same experience? Why would they have chosen to make it different, for different places?
I think that behavior is actually not just for ByteDance, but is actually true for all kinds of global companies. I mean, if you are using and accessing Google services in India, it looks different than if you're accessing it in the US, right? Even Evernote, before, if you were in China accessing Evernote, it had some features there that were not accessible in other parts of the world. And I think this kind of new concept that each country doesn't have to have the exact same experience is actually a positive. Because what it means is global companies can now use specific geographies as experiment areas where they can test some kind of new feature that might be taking off in developing countries, places that might be more mobile first, mobile only, and then use that kind of to perfect what the service should look like and eventually port it over to be global functionality for all of its users.
So that's great. I actually think niche specialization is a really important opportunity, and you should expect adaptation in different markets. Actually, you get a better match when you get adaptation. I think that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. We're at time, so I want to give you the last word in case there's any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience before we say goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you guys are talking about platforms. And again, so the reason why I think super apps can be the next big platform is think about them as single sign-on for the entire web. And I don't know about you guys, but on my computer, I have multiple browsers, each with easily 10, 15 tabs. I'm terrible actually at tab management for my browser. On my phone, tabs are so painful to use. They're very, very difficult. And I don't like having multiple web pages open on my apps, on my browsers on my phone. And I don't like having to download all these different apps. And it's precisely because you can't replicate that tab experience on a small screen. And you don't want to go download a bunch of apps for every time you would just naturally have opened a tab on your web browser. That is why that pain that you're feeling as a user, as I described that is why super apps will work. Because even if you offer something that's 80%, 90% of the functionality, but prevents you from having to go download a completely separate app and re-sign up for it, that will be enough for users to want to do everything in one place.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. This has been informative, not just from the investment and startup side, even for the criteria and the measurement and how to operate the platform side. So I really appreciate that. Connie, your insights have been fantastic. And really even bridging cultures, Silicon Valley and China, also extremely informative. I want to thank you for that.
Thanks for having me.
That was great.
Thank you.